Welcome to the Hey Mom podcast. This show is hosted by me, Audrey, and my sister, Rhoda. Every episode, we will be interviewing our mom. She is our permanent guest. If you have a dilemma, problem, or situation you want a new perspective on, please write in and we will share it on the show. As always, you will remain anonymous. Please email us at heymompodcast121@gmail.com or DM us on our Instagram. Our handle is heymom_podcast. That's all lowercase. Thank you so much and enjoy the show. Hi, Mom. So today we're going to be talking about probably a favorite topic of every parent in the entire world, parental guilt. Something that I'm sure you are as familiar with as the next person. But yeah, that's definitely the topic I want to get into today.
Okay, well, I think it's a very common experience. I don't think you can be a parent without also feeling guilty. Some of that might come from the fact that we get into parenthood completely unprepared. And there's no way to be prepared to be a parent. You can read all the books you want. You can get all the advice from all the experienced parents out there, and none of it actually prepares you for the experience. So you're always going to go into it feeling on the back foot, feeling like you don't know what you're doing. Every child is different and unique, and what works for one person completely fails for you. So each time you become a parent with each individual child, it is a complete universe of its own. And there is no manual for raising your kids. There is only the manual that you create while you're raising the child. And the only time the manual is finished is when the child's all grown up and you don't need it anymore. So I think guilt is just a huge part of the experience because you are 100% going to be inadequate and unable to be perfect and to have the answers that you need and to do everything right. And so no parent ever was, no parent ever will be. So naturally, we're going to feel some guilt when we fail our children. And these little souls that are brought into our lives that are so innocent, and we know that we're shaping their worldview, their experience of themselves, of their bodies, of their intellect, and it's on us. And we have to be perfect. This is the feeling you have as a parent, or you're going to ruin these children. And so we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to be the perfect parent, and we can't be. And sometimes the attempt to be the perfect parent actually causes you to make more mistakes and to create more problems than if you just kind of trusted yourself and went with it. So, very common topic, and I think it's something we can all relate to and worth a deep dive and exploring what we can do about parental guilt when we're confronting it.
Yeah. What would you say, because I've run across this pretty often, there seems to be kind of like two camps of pre-parents, because like that's the position I'm in right now. And like my husband is like, I'm going to be a good parent, period. And so there's almost like a little bit of like an ego when it comes to parenting of just kind of like, I just know that I'm always going to try, I'm going to do my best, which like, I love to hear that. But then I also think there's the other side, which I probably lean a little bit more on. I know I have the support system of aunts and uncles and grandparents that not everyone has, that I think alleviates some of those fears for me. But I would be the parents just like, I'm going to screw this kid up. Like, you have kind of like I'm going to do absolutely everything I can to be the best of the best. And there's kind of this like, rah, I can do this. And then there's the parents that are just kind of like, I'm just going to try and mess up as like little as I can, but I will mess up. Like, I'm probably going to be a bad parent.
Well, both of those seem like they're the same thing. If you think about it, like two ends of a spectrum of behavior and ways to manage the anxiety and the uncertainties of parenthood. And both of them create positive results and negative results. So, for the overconfident parent that is absolutely going to be a good parent, well, they're going to probably get their bubble burst and find out that they make mistakes. And the first time they make a really big blunder, it's going to be pretty upsetting, pretty devastating. It's going to take them time to recover from that. Whereas the other person who knows I'm not going to be perfect, I'm going to make mistakes, the strength of that position is that they're going to come into it with a bit more understanding and compassion for themselves. They're not going to be shocked when they make mistakes. But then there's pitfalls. For them, the pitfall is going to be it becomes an excuse and you start letting yourself off the hook. Well, I'm not a perfect parent. And you start ignoring the signals that you're getting. You need to do something different here. This parenting style isn't working. And you just start ignoring that and creating problems for yourself. And then eventually you'll wake up one day when it's probably too late and be facing a mountain of guilt that you just avoided because, hey, I'm not the perfect parent, using it as an excuse. The pitfall for the other one is they will put on blinders around their own inadequacies and failures because they have to be perfect. They have to be a good parent. So sometimes they won't pivot and shift their parenting style that isn't working because they're so committed to just doing it right. And they don't want to look at how they're already failing, or maybe they've accumulated quite a few mistakes, but they don't want to look at it because they're afraid to confront the guilt that attends those mistakes. And the other person, they both end up somewhere in the middle facing the same mountain of guilt, whether they come at it from the I'm going to be perfect or I'm not the perfect parent approach. I think the end result is always going to be the same. You're going to have to confront it and you're going to have to deal with it. And what's important is how you deal with it.
Yeah. So, do you think the person you choose to have children with plays a big part in kind of dictating or, I don't know, alleviating or making worse your personal parental guilt? Or is it a personal, totally separate from your partner kind of experience? In your personal experience, being married to my dad, like, did that make it some parental guilt worse for you? Did that alleviate some of it because of how he parented?
I definitely think that it can contribute to it in either direction. So if you have guilt around your choice of partner, maybe you thought, oh, they'll change. I'll change them. You get married and they're not able to parent in the way that feels supportive to you, and you end up having to divorce or some other complication, then you're going to carry that guilt into your parenting as well, because it was a choice that you made that impacted the lives of these innocent children who did not choose to be born.
Oh, okay.
So having a good, healthy, loving marriage where you have some trust in your partner, it doesn't have to be perfect, it doesn't have to be ideal, but just trusting that they love your child and they're doing the best that they can, then I think that that itself will alleviate a lot of the guilt you might feel about those choices. And then the emphasis is just more on how am I parenting? You know, there may be a tendency to compare yourself to the other parent, and that can also create guilt. Like, oh, they're doing it right and I'm doing it wrong, or I hate how they're doing it, I'm doing it right. And then you see them get results that you don't get. So all of these are complications and can add to this layering of guilt that you feel as a parent.
Yeah. And I mean, this is like a more personal struggle for me, but I just want to sidestep into maybe how how do you deal with like parenting comparison, like spousal comparison? Because I'm gonna struggle with that. Frank is very different than me. And I love that. I love that we're two very different people. I think we'll also parent quite differently. And I have a little bit more of a tendency to be like, he does everything right. I do things wrong. I should try and be more like him. I should be less like me, which I've confronted that a lot throughout our relationship. I know that's not the way to be, but it's something that I know will come up in some capacity when I have a baby.
Yeah, I think that's a very normal thing too. You're either comparing yourself and seeing yourself as worse and inadequate, or you're comparing yourself and seeing yourself as better and having all the answers. Both of them create similar problems. But the solve for me, and I'm sure that I've shared this with you before, but I'll share it again. The solve for me was recognizing that my kids growing up with two really different parents actually gave my kids double the parenting. So if I had just aligned myself with my husband and we just got on the same page and figured out how to parent together with this like singular plan, this is how we handle these issues, then you're limiting the scope of experience that your children get in their interactions with their parents. So there's going to be things that you do as a parent that are going to far outshine your husband's way of doing things. He's going to have weaknesses where you have strengths because you're kind of opposite. And he's going to have strengths where you have weaknesses. And together, you make one amazing parental unit. And your kids are getting double the parenting because they're getting two parents who are committed to parenting in a way that works best for them. You're not trying to copy the other person. You're really honoring that what you have to bring is unique and valuable, and your child needs that. But the child also needs the other parent's style, the other parent's way of doing things. And they'll get a diversity of parenting that will be missing from those relationships where both parents are just on the same page, doing it the same way, and there's total consistency. There's nothing wrong with that if that's natural to you. I just think there's value to being really different. And instead of comparing, you can actually use the comparison to highlight how the differences that you have in your nature and your parenting approach is giving something more to your child.
Yeah. Yeah, that is a good way of looking at it. So, how, as a parent of 6 children, again, how have you dealt with your parental guilt? Now, it's a broad question, but I'm asking it.
Right. Well, and I think I just struggled with it like a lot of parents do. I called it for a lot of years the torture chamber because it was a place where I would go in my quiet moments after the kids were gone to bed and torture myself with all the things that I did wrong and shame myself and I didn't know how to escape it. It was almost like a reaction to those quiet moments when you're reflecting on how did I do today? How did the kids react? Or you see these flashes of your kids' faces when they were hurt or wounded by something you said to them or sad or scared because of what you did. It just comes back to haunt you. And I just found myself unable to have another way of dealing with it. And so I just chalked it up to one of the effects of being a parent. You just suffer with the guilt. You just go in your torture chamber and pay your punishment. Do your time. And it wasn't until quite a bit later that I began to really find some positive solutions to the parental guilt. And I think the biggest thing that helped me was this idea that there are two kinds of guilt. There is like necessary guilt, and unnecessary guilt. And once I was able to separate the guilt into those two camps, I could take every situation and I could say, okay, the guilt that I'm feeling right now, is it necessary guilt? And the litmus test for necessary guilt is this: can I make amends? Can I clearly state the thing that I did wrong? And can I make amends? And if the answer is yes, then that guilt is necessary in the sense that it's informing you about behavior that you can correct and make amends for and not continue to do in the future. And then there's unnecessary guilt. And this is a kind of ubiquitous, vague, ever-present feeling of inadequacy and shame for mistakes that are both real and unreal. Your own imagination, your imaginary guilt, it's imaginary wrongs you've committed, it's the maybes, the what ifs, it's all of that. And so I sat down and I began to separate the guilt into these two camps. And I was looking at my parenting as a whole. So this is more recent, maybe in the last 5 years. So I have adult children now. And I was still dealing with the parental guilt. No surprise. It stays with you forever. And I separated it into necessary guilt and unnecessary guilt. And I was completely shocked that 90% of my guilt was unnecessary. And as soon as I could see the necessary guilt, I knew immediately what I needed to do. Oh, this is asking me to correct something. Even if it was years ago, it's still saying you did this behavior and you need to make it right in some way, even if it's just an acknowledgement. There was still something to do, and it was very clear what the behavior was and what I didn't like about it and why I thought that it was wrong or bad or ineffective. The rest of it was unnecessary guilt. And once I separated them, I could see that that unnecessary guilt was unfixable. I could never make amends for it. There was nothing to be done but eternal punishment. The torture chamber. Just go in and suffer and pay the price, and that's what it means to be a parent. And I didn't realize that all of that guilt, that unnecessary guilt, might not even be true. I would look at every struggle my children had. A bad day at work, a series of weeks of depression, struggling with a partner. And I would just take that on. Well, that was probably because of me. I probably caused them to feel that way because of something that I did sometime in their childhood. I'm sure it's my fault. And when that unnecessary guilt is all mixed up with the actual legitimate, I did something wrong, I need to make amends with it, it just confuses and makes all of it feel necessary. It makes all of it feel legitimate and requiring you to correct it. So I was really grateful to be able to see the difference, and I was able to let go of all that unnecessary guilt because there was nothing that I could do about it. And maybe I was responsible and maybe I wasn't. And I was okay with that. And then taking care of the necessary guilt, taking those required actions so that I could be free of it, allowed me to let go of the unnecessary guilt.
Yeah. So, what should a parent do when a child, an adult, grown child, comes back to them and you have a good enough relationship that you can communicate with this parent, and this child comes back to this parent and says, hey, I'm in therapy, or I was talking to this person and I realized that you did X, Y, and Z during my childhood and it resulted in this problem for me. And obviously they can say a lot kinder and they can say it very harshly.
Mm.
How should a parent handle, because like every parent's dealing with guilt. When a child comes to you and kind of dumps something on you and it catches you off guard and you're like, oh crap, I didn't know that affected this person. I thought I was doing that right, and now they're telling me I did it wrong. And it can be very confusing. I think most parents have either a shutdown reaction or a bad reaction. Well, how would you say would be the best way to handle being kind of caught off guard or just being presented with that? Because it'd be hard to hear as a parent.
For sure, for sure. Recognize that the child is telling you something about them and their experience. And you need to keep your feelings about it separated until you can reconcile that at a later date. They're not informing you about you. In a way, it has nothing to do with you. You may be having a reaction internally and you're like, oh, okay, that means I've got some stuff I need to work on after this conversation is over. In this moment, this child is telling me something important about their experience. And I need to listen to them. I need to acknowledge them. This is not the time for me to say, oh, I'm so sorry. I can't believe I did those things. This is not the time for that, because now you're making it about you and your guilt. That child is not there to hear about your guilt and hear you apologize. That's not what it's about. They're trying to communicate an awareness they've had about an experience and your relationship to that. So your job in that moment is to hold a really sacred space for them to share the depth of their pain and even accuse you, and you can hold it. You just imagine they're talking about someone else that hurt them. How would you respond to them in that setting? If it wasn't you as the target, you would be really interested in like, well, how are you dealing with that? And what did that feel like for you to have your mother treat you that way? Like you could hold that space for them because it isn't about you. It's about them. And you would really need, you'd have to have a lot of presence and self-awareness in that moment to do that. But if it's something that happens with any regularity, then you can at least come somewhat prepared. The next time your child comes to you with a problem and you're part of it, keep yourself out of it. It isn't about you. It's about them.
Even if they are asking you to be a part of it. Like if they're kind of saying, you did X, Y, and Z, you hurt me, you, and kind of accusatory, like you were saying, like it's still the job of the parent to take themselves out of that situation, even when there's a direct accusation.
Yes.
Because I think it's worth the parent to acknowledge the struggle. And I think you can acknowledge it without taking it on as well.
Right. I mean, it's not going to be easy. I'm not suggesting something that wouldn't be extremely difficult to do. I'm just saying that would be a more effective way, and you would keep yourself engaged with that child during that experience. And so you would want to be able to do that. So the other thing that I wanted to say about that is that the child may need an apology. The child may be seeking an apology. They may need to hear their parents say, I am so sorry that I did those things to you. That was wrong. That was inappropriate. That was out of bounds, whatever. And if you do recognize in that interaction that your child needs that, you're not saying it for you. You're not saying it to relieve any guilt that you feel or trying even to make amends. This is still about the child and what the child needs, not what you need. So just making sure that, the listeners understand that the focus when you're confronted with the child in that situation, whether they're 10 years old, 5 years old, or 25 or 35, your response is to hold a space for them. 100%. This is about them, and I'm going to show up for them. I can take care of my guilt, the things that I did, and what I need to work through separately and on my own. That way, you preserve and even reinforce the connection you have with your child. Your child feels heard, respected, valued, understood, recognized. You're acknowledging what they feel like you did. It isn't about what really happened, because there is no such thing. You're acknowledging what they feel you did, their experience of you as a parent, which you can't know. So it has to be valid because it's real for them, no matter what you think you did. So these parents that get confronted and say, I never did that to you, and I don't know what you're talking about. It isn't about them. They need to acknowledge that their child is needing something from you as the parent, and your goal is to provide enough of safety, love, support, kindness, and a space for them to be able to tell you the truth of their hurt feelings.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you also think that, because I also know that it is common for parents when a child is addressing maybe even a specific situation, for the parent to not say, get on the defense and I didn't mean to, or I'm sorry, or like, that wasn't my fault. I know it's also common to say, oh, I don't remember that, as a way because they genuinely might not. But I also think when it's a recurring process for some people to just say, oh, I forgot that. I didn't know that happened. Oh, I was not aware of that. Then I think that's the easy way to maybe try and not get defensive, or to just kind of deflect responsibility. Like, what do you think that is? Because I thought that was interesting, that some parents will just go into like, I forget,
Right. Well, it's still about you. If you say, I don't remember, you're making the whole interaction about you. Yes, it could be a defense against these accusations. It could be legitimate. You could actually not remember. I mean, there are many times you guys have told me things that I said or did when you were growing up. Thankfully, there aren't very, very many situations in which it was negative. Sometimes it's some good thing that I did. I'm like, wow, I did that? Wow, that's pretty cool. I have no memory of it. So I completely understand parents who literally can't remember and don't remember doing those things. But if you say, well, I don't remember doing that, you have now made it about you. And so again, I go back to, you got to make it about the child. If it happened to the child and it's an experience that impacted them, they need you to acknowledge that. Don't even say, I don't remember. You can just say, wow, that really affected you. I can see how much that hurt you. You're acknowledging it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really sorry. Because if I thought that I had done something like that and I couldn't remember it, I would be very sorry. Because maybe I did do it, maybe I didn't, maybe the kid misunderstood, maybe they confused me with someone else. It doesn't matter. I still want to express that acknowledgement because it's about them. You keep yourself out of it.
Yeah. Yeah, so this leads into, one of our listeners has sent in something that is right along the lines of what we're talking about. And I'm just going to read it out loud. So it says, my 14-year-old son's personality has suddenly changed. We've always had such a close bond, so I don't understand. Selfishly, I feel deserted and betrayed, but at the same time, I'm worried that I've done something wrong. Could this be my fault? I'm a single dad, learning as I go, and maybe it's something I did or didn't do while he was growing up. Can I fix this? He's acknowledged the change, but he won't open up. He tends to be introverted and doesn't really have any friends. He doesn't have a mom or anyone to talk to. I suggested an impartial third party to share his feelings with, like a therapist, but he's not interested. What if he turns to drugs? or does something like suicide, what can I do?
Well, you can hear right away that that natural parental guilt is just built into this person's responses, you know? Afraid of what his child might do. Is it my fault? Is he pulling away because of something that I did? Because we're looking for a way to have control over the things that we can't control. And your children and their experience, especially as they get older, gets less and less in your control. You know, when you start out with a little baby, you're controlling their entire experience. You know, where you set the car seat so that they can take a nap is determined by you. What foods they get fed, when they get put to bed, what TV shows they watch, all of that is controlled. And as they get older, you lose that one bit at a time. By the time you have a 14, 15-year-old son, you have very little control over their life anymore. And that can be a very scary experience as they begin to assert their independence and their own will. And in this case, you know, you have a dad who, according to him, he had this close relationship with his 14-year-old son, and then suddenly the son just turns off, disconnects, doesn't seem to care. He suggests therapy. Let's figure this out. And the son is like, no, I don't want to do that. So I guess the way that I would acknowledge this, first of all, for the parent is if you feel like that you are in this moment handling his rejection of you well, that's the first and most important thing. You don't want to be taking that personally. You want to be holding as much neutral space around it as possible. Not pushing him too hard, like, why aren't you talking to me? Why aren't you like how we used to be? That's just going to shame the child. They're going to feel like that you're saying, you like the younger me and the older me you're disapproving of. So you want to watch that edge and make sure that you're not personalizing their behavior. They're going through the most massive transformation. We all know this. Who liked being 14? Honestly.
Literally no one.
It's such a difficult time in a person's life. And then to have to be taking care of your parents' feelings and worrying about whether or not you're hurting your parents, it's too much for a child. The parent has the maturity and the capacity to handle their feelings and their child's. The child doesn't have that. You're the responsible person that should be able to hold that and not take it personally. It might hurt. You can have your private moment of pain and worry, but you do not bring that to your interactions with that child whatsoever. Similarly to the description that I provided earlier about the adult child coming back to the parent, you need to make it be about the child. Stay with what are the child's needs. And then the other thing that I would say is stay connected. Whatever that looks like, this child is obviously pulling away and disconnecting. There's lots of ways to stay connected to your child. Don't ever let that connection become completely severed. And you do have some power here, because I think the relationship between a parent and child, it's like there's two imaginary strings. And one string comes from the parent and connects to the child. The other one comes from the child and connects to the parent. Now, the child can withdraw. The child can take their string that's connected to you, the parent, away and say, I don't want to be connected to you. But they can't take away your connection to them. They don't have any power over that. Now, what a lot of parents do, they get scared, they get hurt, they feel rejected. They don't know how to stay present and connected to their child while their child is being rude, disrespectful, pulling away, saying things that they probably don't mean. You got to stay connected. Don't pull that string away and remove your connection, the one thing you actually have power over in that relationship, because you're hurt. It's going to be reactive and instinctive to do that. And I'm just saying, don't do that.
Yeah. Do you think it's natural for most teenagers to go through a phase of rejection of parents or family? Or would you say that it usually comes from just specific personalities? Or is there some form of it for all children?
I mean, I would say that all children do have to disconnect from their parents. I think in this example, that it seems a bit dramatic. It seems a bit stark, where you have this close connection and then suddenly it's like, I don't want nothing to do with you.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't know if that's actually the case. We don't have very much information about all the logistics here, but he described his son as being very introverted, and it's possible that was just the only way he knew how to establish his own identity. And if his father was like really connected and loving and very present in his life, he might have felt a bit overwhelmed by his dad's presence. And a single dad. He doesn't even have another parent to experience that different relationship with.
Or to counterbalance maybe just the whole parenting
Right. I mean,
struggle.
imagine the dad having a wife to go spend time with, and then the son feels like he's not under a microscope. You know, maybe as a single dad, he's trying so hard to be a good dad that he's got them under a microscope watching them, and they feel like, well, I gotta get some space. So the son may have felt like he needed to really establish some distance, because 14, 15, especially for boys, they're trying to figure out who they are. And they don't want to be like their dad at that age. They want to be like them. And so sometimes it hurts. They can kind of cut into you deeply in that attempt to establish their identity. Who am I? What matters to me? How do I feel? And so you will reject your parent. The other thing I do want to say is that it's, in my experience, it's only the parents who have really shown up that get rejected that deeply, because they are the safest person, that child can actually push them away and know that they're never going to abandon them. And so they're almost, it's not like they're testing the parental love. It's like they know that parent is going to love them no matter what. And so they will push the boundaries, the edge of how far they can go. And
I mean, and I've had this experience with you, not for a long period of time, but the only way that you can even express that kind of intense kind of rejection of a parent that sometimes happens when you're in your teens and stuff like that, that rejection can really only happen when you have a secure relationship with that parent.
right.
You know, because I think when you have an insecure relationship with that parent, the teenager just slinks off, you know, and then suddenly this parent realizes maybe months down the road, like, oh, why are they not really around? Or like, oh, they just kind of disappear in the room. And, you know, it is that like parent that's very invested in the relationship, and they know you. And then that you have that trust with that child, but that child can reject you because there's trust that parent can handle it.
That's right.
Because if I had a reaction when I was a teenager and being like, oh, Mom, I'm mad at you for no reason. And you were like, oh my gosh, what have I done? Like, I'm so sorry. And you followed me around and you were like, what can I do? Like, it would actually make me want to reject you more. Because like, there was like and it's not a failure, but I'm going to use that word, like a failure of trust that you could handle, that I could be my meanest self and that you could handle it. And it's not necessarily like in everyone's repertoire to be able to handle rejection from your kid and just, oh, whatever, you know. But I felt like you handled it really well, and it also didn't last very long. Like, I usually came back by the end of the day and was just like, I don't know what the heck that was. But, like, thanks for not making me feel bad or guilty or um just having a reaction. Like, you were pretty steady.
Well, I was practicing what I described. I understood that you were having an experience, and it was my job to hold a space for you to have that experience, even if I was the object of your resentment and your verbal rejection. I knew it wasn't about me. Even if I had legitimately done something, I also knew it wasn't about me. You were having your experience. And so I tried to just create that container for you to have that experience. But that it's true what you're saying. That can only happen when there's a secure relationship. So that's sort of what I want to express to this dad, that your son is rejecting you because he can,
Yes.
because you can handle it. And he knows that the love is strong enough. That bond of connection is strong enough to survive even his outright rejection of you. And if you're connected to him and you will not pull away out of fear, out of stress, out of guilt, if you'll just stay, then you are in the best position to prevent that child from turning to drugs or committing suicide. Now, I'm not saying that you can prevent that.
If there's any guarantee.
There is not.
Yeah.
But you are positioning yourself in the best possible place and doing the most to avoid a sad and unfortunate outcome like that. And then, if it does happen, you know that you did everything that was possible and you showed up as the absolute best parent that you could be for them. And at least you have that. At least you did everything that you could. So I just want to thank our listener for sharing and letting us have the opportunity to look into his life and talk a bit about his struggle with his son. And I just have to say, being a parent is one of the hardest jobs. And we don't have a society that, I don't think, that acknowledges parents in a healthy way. They either feel sorry for parents or I just think we need to support each other. And we need to support each other in the role of parents because it is a freaking hard job. And so I'm rooting for you.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's a journey I'm a little bit afraid about, but I know I got a good backup support system that I can lean on when I need to. But yeah, no, parenting is a topic we're going to talk about quite a bit, I think. And yeah, I'll talk to you soon.